So you're in the market for a traditional classic British sports car. MGB's perhaps a little bit too obvious, midget's a little bit too small, and you want something that's really DIY friendly as well because you like getting busy with the spanners. Well, the Spitfire really is the ideal choice. Based on the Herald, means the body just lifts off if you need to. You hope you don't need to. Ever so easy to work on, great fun to drive, and you've got a huge choice of Spitfire models to choose from. So what do you need to know? Probably one of the easiest parts of the car to assess is the bodywork, because like the Herald, the car uses a separate body and chassis. It's based on the Herald, although the body on the Spitfire sits a little bit lower. The body shell in the Spitfire was welded up in sections before it was fitted to the chassis, unlike the Herald, which is all in separate parts. So it is that little bit more rigid, and so you do need to consider that the quality of the sills and the strength of them and the quality of any repairs that have been done. But most of the panels are bolt-on, so you can replace them, and a really scabby looking body doesn't have to be the end of the world, although the nose cone, just like the E-Type, can get quite expensive, and you can criticise me in the comments for comparing the GT6 and the Spitfire to the E-Type again if you like. But anyway, you want to make sure that the nose cone is presentable, because that is quite costly. Underneath you've got the chassis. You want to make sure that it isn't obviously damaged, buckled in any way, because some of these cars could have been crashed 30 years ago, and a slightly iffy repair was done cheaply back then, and of course no one's ever noticed. So check it's all straight and true. Check the quality of any sort of patched repairs that have been done. It's not the end of the world if someone's patched in a bit of rust, but make sure they've done it properly. And you've got outriggers around sort of the level of the bulkhead that tend to be in the firing line of all the road dirt, and they need to be solid. So basically check that the body structure is sound and solid, certainly the central part of it, and check that the chassis is solid. Of course, if you do need to take the body off to do extensive chassis repair, it's actually quite easy. I've even met people who have taken the body off and hung it from the rafters in their garage before, and then worked on the chassis and lowered it back down. It might sound extreme, but it's not impossible to do that sort of thing. So you can work on these cars quite extensively at home. You can do quite a thorough restoration without needing a workshop lift or full workshop. While you're there, check the quality of the roof as well. It's a very simple roof. Replacements aren't hugely expensive, and of course you can get better quality roofs than the original vinyl jobs, but yeah, you don't want it to be leaking, do you? So if it's scabby, then try and knock the price down. This one's perfect. This is what they should look like. Uncreased back window, no rips, no tears, and it's nice and taut. So that's what you're aiming for. So moving forwards, the running gear. Well, the engine access is just tremendous. I mean, there you go. Everything you need to see, engine and suspension. Any problems should be quite obvious. You've got to grease the front trunnions on the suspension, as you do with so many of the Triumphs of this era. That's a safety issue, and it'll be an MOT fail if they're too worn. Engine-wise, the Spitfire came with 3 different engines. You had the 1147 engine in the earlier cars, then the 1300, and then the 1500, and it's the 1500 engine we've got here, actually in an earlier car, so it just shows you how common it is to find the engines interchanged between the different marques. It doesn't really matter if you find a car with a different engine, it's generally going to be a better engine, so the 1500 engine does have that useful extra bit of go to it. As with most of the Triumph engines of this era, expect oil leaks. Unless it's hugely severe, just live with it, frankly. You can get a problem, as with so many of the Triumph engines, with end flow. You need to have an assistant press the clutch while you watch for movement on the bottom pulley and things like that. Most of them will be fine, though, because it's a well-known problem and people do keep on top of it. Suspension-wise, well, I mean, it doesn't get easier to access than this, does it? You've got to bear in mind that the trunnions need greasing on these, like they do on the Herald, and it's a MOT fail if they're too worn. So you need to keep on top of that. And if you can see evidence that they've been greased recently, then it means that the car's been looked after properly. Yeah, you can't fail to manage to do DIY servicing on one of these, can you? Everything you need is accessible. I mean, you can just sit on the wheel, it's ever so easy. This one's got an uprated alley radiator, and you can get all sorts of performance parts like this for these cars. it's quite a pleasure to sort them out and get them well sorted. On the subject of suspension, it's the rear end where things are a little bit more complicated, because Triumph used a single transverse leaf spring on these cars, and it had the effect of was a simple swing axle system, and it had the effect of creating drastic camber change in cornering, especially if you were braking in the corners. It's the same with the GT6, and a lot of them ended up in hedges as a result back in the day. I mean, people don't drive them that hard now, but it's not uncommon to find modified parts on these cars, and people do quite often upgrade them with Rotoflex parts from the GT6, the later design that did improve things somewhat. So don't be confused if you find later parts or aftermarket parts or anything like that. It's just something that's commonly done just to improve the handling of the cars. If the leaf springs are tied, you'll see the cars just sitting too low at the back, and that looks terrible, especially if the tyres are hidden inside the arches. It's all wrong. Get it sorted. Other than that, it's a fairly basic system, so you've got wheel bearings to worry about. They need a press to change, and the usual bushes and things like that, but otherwise, yeah, don't be confused if you find non-standard bits under there. So the inside of the car, well, as you can see from this car, there's endless scope for personalising it. All this wood trim and whatnot is non-standard on this car, but it's all available easily from the network of Triumph suppliers here in the UK. These leather seats with piping, the motor-litre wheel, it's all nice stuff to have, and it does make the car feel quite nice. As standard though, the car's really quite basic, so there's not a lot really to go wrong. But if you do get one that's got a tatty interior, and they do tend to suffer, people leave the roof down and it rains, and bird mess gets in there. Don't be too worried, because you can get absolutely everything for these cars, and it's not expensive either. So it's quite a nice, satisfying DIY proposition to tidy one up. You can do it all at home, and it's quite satisfying. What this does illustrate though is the mix and match possibilities of the Spitfire. You'll get Spitfires that have got GT6 engines. You'll get Spitfires like this one that are, I think, an American shell we've got here, or an American car with a bonnet from a UK car and a later 1500 engine. It just shows how easy it is to mix and match with these cars. So if you buy a project and you find the engine's had it, or you don't like the interior or whatever, it's ever so easy to change it all. So that's where you score with these and the MGs, to be fair. But the Spitfire is ever so easy to work on, isn't it? So I think it's got the edge over the MG really. As for the gearbox, well, they're all 4-speed, although you had the option of an overdrive. And if you do hear sort of rumblings and rattlings from the transmission, and you think it needs a new gearbox, well, the 1500 box is probably the better one to go for, because BL beefed it up a bit to use it in the Marina of all things. So it's slightly more robust. So if you're going to go for an exchange, then get the later box. But you shouldn't need to. Hopefully, it's not that powerful, and driven carefully, the gearbox is going to last forever. So as you probably realised, there's not a lot of the Spitfire to go wrong, and what there is, you can get to really easily to fix it. So your biggest problem is going to be working out which one you want and working your way through the model range. Spitfire was initially launched with the 1147 engine, which appeared in the Mark 1 and the Mark 2. 63 horsepower in the Mark 1, 67 horsepower in the Mark 2. Then for the Mark 3 they fitted the 1300 engine, which gave you 75 horsepower. Then the Mark 4 came along, and in 74 they added the 1500 engine, which I think took power down to about 71 horsepower, but they were about the same on the road. And of course the last of the line, the 1500 engine, remained with them. So it depends what you want really. The very early cars, they're the collector's ones really. They do have that classic style, and the later ones have that 70s style, which of course a lot of people like as well. But whichever one you get, rest assured the parts supply is tremendous. It's as good as an MG, and you can't fail to enjoy it. They're a great fun car. So there you have it, the Spitfire. Easier to own than an MGB, I think. Possibly one of the easiest classic sports cars to own, really, given its DIY-friendly nature. Of course, if you want a little bit more power, there's always the GT6. But for now, I think if you're after an easy-to-own, fun, traditional classic car, then Spitfire does it. Like and subscribe it, and find many more buying guides on our site.